All right, so you know how it goes sometimes, right? You think you have a handle on the news of the day, and boom, some truly wild story just pops up out of nowhere.
Yep, it happens. And well, that's kind of what we're dealing with today.
A deep dive into some pretty remarkable and honestly kind of unsettling reports coming straight out of the US federal government.
Uh-huh. And this story has it all, folks. Cutting edge AI, Elon Musk, and an entity you might not be familiar with called DOGE.
DOGE. Now, before you think we're talking about that digital currency, that's not it. This DOGE stands for the Department of Government Efficiency, right? And this is already generating some serious buzz online.
It really is. So, today we're going to examine some claims that this DOGE team operating under the Trump administration allegedly used AI to monitor federal employees' communications.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. And what makes this particularly interesting and maybe even a little unnerving is the source of this info. We're pulling directly from a Reuters report, which relies on accounts from folks with firsthand knowledge of this whole situation. Plus, they dug into some court documents that shed light on DOG's activities.
So this is not just speculation. We're looking at pretty credible sources here, people on the inside and legal records. So our mission today is to break down these core allegations for you, explore the evidence or lack thereof, and try to grasp what this all means. It honestly sounds like something out of a sci-fi thriller, but according to these reports, it's happening right now.
Yeah, truth is stranger than fiction, as they say.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. At the heart of this whole thing is a pretty serious claim. Individuals within the Trump administration reportedly told some federal employees that Elon Musk's DOGE team was using AI to keep tabs on communications within at least one federal agency.
And the goal, according to these reports, was to identify what they called hostility towards President Trump and his agenda.
Right? So we're not talking about routine performance reviews or just checking if the network's running smoothly. This is AI allegedly being used to flag any communications that express negativity towards the president or his policies.
Yeah, exactly. And that raises some pretty big red flags about how technology is being used in government.
It really does. I mean, if you're a federal employee, wouldn't you want to know if your emails or chats are being analyzed for expressing the wrong opinions?
Absolutely. And to make matters even more complicated, there's this veil of secrecy surrounding DOGE itself. The sources quoted in the Reuters report keep saying that a lot of what this department does remains, and I quote, shrouded in secrecy. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence, does it?
Nope, not at all. When you're talking about AI potentially being used to surveil government employees, you would expect a certain level of transparency in public discussion.
But that doesn't seem to be happening here, which makes a lot of folks understandably nervous.
Makes sense. And then we have the specific mention of AI deployment, in particular, Elon Musk's Grock chatbot.
Grock. Now that's an interesting one.
It is. The report points to a heavy deployment of Grock by the DOGE team. For our listeners who might not be familiar with Grock, it's a sophisticated large language model, kind of like the tech behind other AI assistants you might know. But this one was developed by Elon Musk's team.
Yep. And the details of how exactly DOGE used Grock are still kind of murky. We don't have precise info on its application, but the fact that they were using this cutting-edge AI chatbot in this context is pretty significant.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder what kind of instructions they were giving Grock. What were the criteria for flagging this so-called hostility? I mean, AI can't just inherently understand political sentiment without very specific training and parameters, right?
Exactly. Someone had to tell it what to look for.
Right? And on top of the AI surveillance concerns, we have these reports about the DOGE team's communication methods.
Oh, yeah, that's another layer to this whole thing.
It is. The report states that they were allegedly using the Signal app for their internal communications. Now, Signal's a pretty popular messaging app, but what's raising eyebrows here is its disappearing messages feature.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah. So those disappearing messages could potentially violate federal record-keeping rules. The whole idea is that government communication should be archived and accessible for transparency and accountability. If messages are vanishing into thin air, that throws a wrench into the whole system.
Right? It creates a situation where it's very difficult, if not impossible, to trace what was said or decided.
Exactly. And to add some legal weight to this, Kathleen Clark, a government ethics expert, was pretty clear in her assessment. She stated flat out that using Signal without backing up those messages to official federal records would be unlawful. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is. It suggests that they might have been knowingly skirting the law.
Potentially.
So let's recap for a second. We have an AI system allegedly sniffing out dissent, and the team running this operation is communicating in a way that could be intentionally designed to avoid creating a permanent record. That's a pretty troubling combination, don't you think?
Yeah, that doesn't exactly paint a picture of transparency and accountability.
Not at all. And the report gives us a specific example of where this was allegedly happening. The Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA.
The EPA, right? So, according to the report, certain EPA managers were informed by Trump appointees that DOGE's AI was being rolled out to monitor EPA employees' communications.
And the stated purpose? To look for language deemed hostile to Trump or Musk.
Yep. Very specific targets there. It's not just general negativity towards the government, it's specifically aimed at those two individuals.
Right? And it wasn't just emails either. Apparently, Microsoft Teams, which a lot of agencies use for virtual meetings and chats, was also allegedly being monitored.
Which makes sense. I mean, a lot of workplace communication happens on those platforms now, especially with more people working remotely.
Absolutely. And one of the details that really stood out to me was a warning reportedly given to an EPA manager: be careful what you say, what you type, and what you do. Whoa, that's a chilling statement.
It is, right? Imagine working in an environment where you constantly feel like Big Brother is watching your every digital move.
It would definitely create a chilling effect on free speech and discourage people from speaking their minds.
No doubt. Now, the EPA did issue a statement in response to all of this.
They did. They acknowledged that they were looking at AI to better optimize agency functions and administrative efficiencies, but they specifically denied using AI to make personnel decisions in concert with DOGE, and they didn't directly address the surveillance allegations.
Right? So they're saying they're exploring AI, but not in the way described in the report. It's a very carefully worded statement that leaves a lot open to interpretation.
It does. You could read a lot into what they didn't say.
Definitely. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about Elon Musk's stated goals for DOGE. What was he trying to achieve with this whole initiative?
Well, publicly, Musk has always maintained that his main goal for DOGE was to make the U.S. federal government more efficient. He wanted to target waste, fraud, and abuse. And he set a pretty ambitious goal of cutting government spending by $1 trillion. $1
trillion. That's an enormous amount of money.
It is. It's roughly 15% of the entire U.S. annual budget.
Wow. So he was aiming for a major overhaul of how the government spends money.
Absolutely. And he's been talking about the potential of AI to do this for a while. Even before the Trump administration, he suggested that AI could eventually replace government workers.
Really? How would that even work?
His idea was to leverage the mountains of data that the government collects and use it to build a dynamic AI system that could basically do the jobs currently done by humans.
Wow, that's a pretty radical vision.
It is. It shows you how much faith he has in AI's capabilities.
So the big picture was to create a leaner, meaner government powered by technology. But the allegations of AI surveillance and the secrecy surrounding DOGE raised some serious ethical and legal questions.
Oh, absolutely. Cybersecurity experts and government ethicists are pretty worried about the lack of transparency around all of this.
One of the biggest concerns is that the information gathered by this AI could be misused to benefit Musk's businesses, to push a political agenda, or even to target political opponents.
Right? And Kathleen Clark's quote about the alleged surveillance is especially striking. She called it an abuse of government power to suppress or deter speech that the President of the United States doesn't like. That's a pretty serious accusation, and it goes to the heart of concerns about government overreach and censorship.
Definitely. And we also have to consider Elon Musk's role as a special government employee. There are rules that specifically forbid people in those positions from engaging in government activities that would benefit them or their companies. And the fact that his company's AI, Grock, was allegedly being used within DOGE, well, that raises some eyebrows about potential conflicts of interest.
It does. It makes you wonder if there was any personal gain involved.
Right? And the Reuters report doesn't just stop at the communication monitoring. They also dug into some other transparency issues with DOGE, specifically their handling of official documents.
Oh yeah, that part's pretty interesting too.
It is. So the report says that some DOGE staffers were allegedly bypassing standard vetting processes and chains of custody by working directly in Google Docs.
Google Docs?
Yeah. Instead of following the usual protocols for circulating single copies of drafts. So basically, they were collaborating online, which might sound efficient on the surface.
Yeah, I can see how that would speed things up.
But it goes against established procedures that are designed to ensure proper record keeping and accountability in government.
right? So it's like they were cutting corners potentially at the expense of transparency.
Exactly. And when it came to public access to information, the Trump administration was adamant that DOGE was exempt from certain transparency laws.
Uh-huh. They argued that DOGE, being part of the executive office of the president, wasn't subject to things like the Freedom of Information Act, which allows the public to request access to government records.
So basically, they were claiming that DOGE was above certain laws that apply to other parts of the government.
That's essentially what they were arguing, and this didn't sit well with everyone. An ethics watchdog group called Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, filed a lawsuit demanding access to DOGE's documents.
Good for them. What was their reasoning for the lawsuit?
Well, they cited DOGE's unusual secrecy, including the reported use of Signal. They basically argued that the public has a right to know what this group is up to.
And what happened with the lawsuit?
Well, a federal judge actually ordered DOGE to start handing over records.
Oh, wow. So they were legally compelled to be more transparent.
They were. But according to the Reuters report, as of the time of their reporting, DOGE hadn't handed over any documents.
So they were defying a court order?
It seems that way, which really adds fuel to the fire regarding accusations of DOGE operating in secrecy.
It does. And the report also gives us some glimpses into how DOGE's presence was affecting various government agencies.
Yeah, there are reports of tighter administrative controls at some agencies, with staffers being shut out of information and decision-making processes. And the example of the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, is especially concerning.
The OPM, what's so important about them?
Well, OPM is basically the government's HR department. They handle a huge amount of sensitive personal information for all federal employees.
I see. So what happened at OPM when Musk's team came in?
Well, reportedly, OPM employees were suddenly locked out of a database that contained personal information on millions of current and former federal workers.
Whoa, that's a huge data breach waiting to happen.
It is. And it also shows a major shift in how the agency was being run. The report also mentions that over 100 tech staff at OPM lost access to the cloud environment where essential applications were stored.
Wow, so basically they were cut off from the systems they needed to do their jobs.
Exactly.
And access was reportedly restricted to just 2 individuals. That kind of centralized control within a critical agency like OPM is definitely unusual and raises questions about data security and oversight.
For sure. And we have to remember that OPM played a key role in the administration's goal of shrinking the government.
That's right. OPM issues directives related to personnel matters across the entire government. So having control over it would give DOGE a lot of power to implement those downsizing goals.
It's starting to sound a little bit like a power grab.
It does, doesn't it?
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive for you today, we're left with a ton of unanswered questions and some serious concerns. We've explored these reports about Elon Musk's DOGE team potentially using AI to surveil federal employees for expressing dissenting opinions. We've looked at the secrecy surrounding DOGE, their questionable communication practices, and the lack of transparency about their data management.
And we've highlighted the concerns of ethics experts, the potential for conflicts of interest, and the impact of DOGE on various government agencies like the EPA and OPM.
And let's be clear, these are still allegations and reports. We need more information and a thorough investigation to get the full picture.
Absolutely. But really makes you think about the bigger picture here with AI becoming more and more powerful. What does this mean for privacy and oversight within government?
Excellent point. And it's not just about government either. These issues are relevant to any large organization that's using AI, right? We have to find a way to balance the pursuit of efficiency with the protection of individual rights.
That's the key question, isn't it? And it's one that we're going to have to grapple with more and more as technology continues to advance.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that needs to happen now before it's too late.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive, folks, but we want to leave you with something to ponder. As AI becomes increasingly integrated into our lives, what are the boundaries we need to set to ensure that it's used responsibly and ethically? It's a question that deserves careful consideration from all of us.
Well said.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.
Bye.